What the fuck? Audio. Okay. And here we are for an episode of Dualistic Unity Raw. At the moment, I can't recall what day it is. I know we're a few minutes off of our usual start time. It's Monday, right? It's Monday, and I know that because I had an appointment earlier today. Not I had an appointment, but somebody else had an appointment in relation to something in my life. I'm being super cryptic because it's fun for me, because now the listener's going, what the fuck's he talking about? And I don't have to tell you. And I think that's the fun part about life, is the recognition that this is your life. This is your life. In the same way that if you went to a movie theater and you were sitting down watching the movie intently, resonating with the characters, learning from the scenes, learning from the situation, and then all of a sudden you started listening to the guy over your shoulder who's talking about his opinion of the movie, and then you're listening to the kid in front who's whining about not getting what they want, and so you're missing the movie. And the problem here is that those people around us in the theater are our doubts and thoughts. There are alternate personas. It's the audience of possible yous and all the thoughts that belong to all those possible yous. And it takes away from the movie. It takes away from the experience that you would be having if you were attentive to it happening. I think it's really helpful to remember that this is your movie. And so there is no actual movie that you're watching so much as the movie that you are. And in that movie, you get to determine what you get from this. You get to determine whether or not that moment where you fumbled, you did something absent-mindedly, you made an honest mistake, and you could take those moments and make it into laughter, or you could turn it into a moment of judgment, where the character now has a journey, where they have to reconcile something, where they have to become more. But it's your movie. You are very much determining what you get out of it. And that's why it's fun to just play sometimes, to not take things so seriously, to be able to start a podcast episode, for example, being vague and cryptic, because it's fun for me. And hopefully maybe somebody else found that entertaining as well. But even if they didn't, my life is enriched by it, and nobody's hurt. It doesn't take away from anybody else's experience, unless that person is super uptight and they're like, get to the fucking point, Ray. You know, in which case, no.
Like, and the ability to not take it as seriously, like the lack of a need to do so, is so exciting. Like, if you are watching a movie and you start hearing, like, I like that analogy a lot, like the watching a movie, because it can feel like, you know, being in the middle of a theater and like every assumption, opinion, perception, like it's can be turning around and staring at the person talking, like turning around and looking at them and interacting with them. And it's okay to do that. Like, knowing that it's okay to do that, I think can help a lot, or it can be important to remember that it's okay to get focused on someone's opinion, because it's almost like your opinion is just someone else's opinion. It isn't immediately you, it's someone else's thought, like the person sitting in the movie theater, and you don't get to hear yourself in a sense. You don't you don't have to listen to yourself in a thought so much, and you can just be watching the movie, because that's always going to be playing out, whether you're focused on someone else's voice or not. Like, it's still playing out. There's nothing you have to do, or no person you have to get rid of in the theater to pay attention more closely. Like, they can be there. And I think sometimes the less attention you're giving, you know, the person yapping about their opinion, like eventually that person leaves the movie theater. Like, that opinion isn't at the forefront so much. It could be like they could come back at any point, but it's still like that drastic difference between watching the movie and intently listening to what someone else's thoughts about what's going on are, because that the opinions, the preferences, the thoughts, the response, even, it's almost so impersonal that it's not even yours. But if you assume that it is, it can seem very, very important to focus on or maintain. But
Yeah, it's cool to be able to bounce back and see yourself, as someone that's talking in the audience of someone else watching their movie, because you are also that as well. And how easy it is to point out what someone else is, they're not paying attention to the movie, and it's like, for you to say that you weren't paying attention to the movie, and so the people in the audience are reflecting, very much similar priorities, and then being able to watch the movie and kind of the white noise, the people in the audience start to sound like white noise and then sound like nothing at all. And that reminds me of the tinnitus in my ear, because it's a constant ringing, and yet sometimes I hear nothing at all. But when I feel the most stressed, it's like I can't help but hear that ringing in my ears. And when I'm stressed, I can't help but hear everyone else in the audience. But when I am more relaxed, it's easier to tune them out, and to not want to tell them, shh, be quiet, I'm trying to watch the movie, and instead it almost feels effortless that the attention is drawn to the movie, and then it becomes a lot more enjoyable, and nothing seems to be taking away from it, even though I know that people are still chatting in the audience, and there's still some internal commentary about them, from my side as well. And so all that's still going, and yet that's not taking anything away from the movie or watching it. And then kind of seeing how the more I pay attention to the movie, the more I notice about that movie, and how the depth of that movie deepens, the more I can, get out of the way of watching that movie, whether it's other people that are in the way, or just my lack of focus in that moment.
See, it's funny because we can expand this and include the movie theater and the audience as part of the movie, because the fact is there really are no other people in the audience. Right? As we've said before, any judgment that you're not holding onto yourself, you don't even notice when somebody else is judging. So the audience, the other voices, the opinions that you're hearing are yours. It's your cast of audience members that you're paying attention to or not. And that's equally part of the movie. How much are you paying attention to them? Right? Not recognizing that the only reason you're paying attention to them is because you're paying attention to what they're voicing within you. And so I really enjoyed the point there being, it's not about pointing out how the other perceptions are lacking, because you're not going to educate those perceptions into not lacking. Those perceptions will always exist. Mm-hmm. They will always exist as potential. These are not audience members that just fade from existence. They always exist in potential. Mm-hmm. And they're there as soon as we want to hear what they're saying.
Yeah, but they're still us. And I think that is part of it too, is like, it's still a bunch of people like watching, and you're one of them. And like the voices in your head are still assumptions about their voices, as they're like watching the same movie as you are, in a sense. And there's like because that brings, not like, it doesn't bring about more camaraderie, but just a willingness to look at, like, you're alone in your assumptions for sure, but like, you're not alone in the experience of like watching the movie. It's like yes and no. It's both and neither, because like, to you are, but everyone is just as equally going to be involved mm-hmm. in that, and like going to have the potential to push or pull on things, or have influence one way or the other. And I think a lot of times just how much we're focused on some sort of should or shouldn't in ourselves can kind of distract us from being attentive, having that push, sway,
Mhm.
pull on things.
Yeah, it's fun to expand this analogy about the movie, also including the audience and the theater, because for me, I could just think the movie right now, setting, a bedroom, characters, 3 people sitting in chairs in front of mics. Like I could totally describe this in like screenplay mode. And woman speaks, makes no sense. No, I was kidding. But I don't have to. And that's the great part about it too, is that none of the lines matter. And whether you feel certain about those lines or you don't, you just don't know how someone is going to perceive it. And the great thing is that they're going to perceive it in every single way. To someone who's reading the screenplay or watching the movie, the line will make total sense. To someone else, it will make none. And then everything else will fall in between. And some people will bounce between things feeling like they make sense and parts of it they're not resonating with. And so that's the great thing about movies and stories, is that they're full of potential experiences in terms of how you enjoy them, how you take them in, but they don't have to be taken so seriously and treated as an absolute fact. And that's what I love about stories and movies who portray those stories, including the audience, because I have been in movie theaters watching a live movie and hearing people's commentary in the back absolutely added to the experience for me. It enhanced the movie because I accepted it as part of the movie, was the commentary, like director commentary, and people accept that more so than they would the audience commentary, or hearing someone chuckling as something that happens in the movie, a surprising comedic twist of events, and how that adds to it. And so I very much like including the audience and the theater, because the environment, the space around that experience very much is just as important, or adds just as much. Because without the space of silence, there could be no sound. And yet we don't think of silence as being a part of sound. And we think of them as being opposites, but they're both complementary and opposing. And I like that, because we had in our call earlier today that,
Episode 40.
yeah, that same thing, how concepts can be both opposite and complementary. And yet we seem to forget that more easily than we bring that up, that just because something is opposing doesn't mean that it doesn't complement the thing that you think it opposes.
Absolutely. It's funny, we were talking about characters and movies and whatnot, and it dawned on me that, because again, life isn't really a movie, right? Like that's the misleading part about movies. I think that's why people get very addicted to movies. People get addicted to certain storylines. Disney has a certain vibe, that
Right.
kind of thing.
Cult classics, they call them.
But you will notice that it's always with characters that are oversimplified to quite obviously be the good guy or the bad guy, the hero or the villain. And it's because people like having a very simplistic view of a character. But the more nuanced the character, the more nuanced the situation, the less movie-like it is, which is where you start getting your indie films, right? Which some just have a conversation over coffee, things like that. Like some of these movies never see the light of day because they're not following that typical template. They are in fact trying to mimic life happening, but there's nothing satisfying about that. Like there's a lot of open to interpretation in every situation. I know that didn't make any sense. There's a lot of stuff that's open to interpretation. That made far more sense. Okay, that felt better. But the point is like a good example would be, everybody here has seen Willy Wonka with Gene Wilder, the old version. Okay.
Yes.
So there's a scene at the beginning of Willy Wonka where Gene Wilder insisted that he be able to do this scene if he was going to do the movie. It was actually part of his agreement. He's like, if I'm going to do the movie, this is what I want to do. And it's where Willy Wonka comes out of his chocolate factory and he's hobbling with a cane. And then all of a sudden he rolls into a front roll and springs to his feet. And that was Gene Wilder's idea. And it's because otherwise Willy Wonka would have been a very simplistic character. Kind of just like the mystery fun candy man. Right? Where now everybody was suspicious of Willy Wonka. all of a sudden there was more nuance to the character. Nobody knew what to think of him. And that in itself changed the entire movie, which is why sometimes Willy Wonka seems downright scary and dark, right? But it doesn't catch you off guard because right from the start, he's a question mark. That's kind of the point about people, right? Everybody's a question mark. And we desperately want to oversimplify. We want to make them a hero or a villain. We want to make them a friend or a foe. They're just people.
And the willingness to be that question mark too kind of brings excitement to things. It's actually like public service in a sense to be that question mark, because like being that question mark for in yourself and like the willingness to do that and not try and maintain some answer, like answering knowing yourself, like that will potentially confuse people a little bit more, you know, again, not to do it for a reason for anyone else, but like besides just freeing yourself, because being a question mark to yourself, it's like there's a lot more there, there's a lot more available, there's a lot more potential in a question mark than there is in an answer. There's a lot more potential in a question than an answer. There's no potential in an answer at all. It's certain, it's guaranteed, it's done, it's dead, it's finished, it's there. And like the question mark just opens everything back up, like opens your mind back up in a sense, because there isn't the need to maintain an answer or the desire to get to an answer as quickly as you possibly can. Like to be that question mark, and it gives so much more of like there's no boundary necessarily to you, and there's more freedom. Like life can become a lot more exciting when it's like, oh, it's actually great if I show up, you know, usually I feel this sort of way or act this sort of way, like almost purposely act differently, like purposely be ridiculous or purposely like even be quiet, which is something that I have like a strong aversion to doing that, because I assume there's something wrong with doing that. And that can oftentimes make me more quiet because there's a panic when it's there. It's kind of like getting caught in your head. It's like if you panic, if you assume that you shouldn't be lost in your head, focused on thoughts, focused on something else, you panic and then you just stay there instead of not panicking. You know, not panicking as soon as something's going down. Like anything being on the table means, you know, how you're showing up as you are, the degree of tension, the degree of relaxation. Like you can be cool with that. That opens up the potential to changes, at least to it shifting and changing. Whereas when it should be a certain way, it's like there's way less opportunity for organic shifts and changes, even moment to moment. Like you almost have a desire. You can have a desire to like maintain that, to hold on to that thing that you're doing that I'm kind of like, I don't even know what I'm talking about anymore. But yeah.
No, I feel like that was, you know, talking about the experience of change feeling like pulling teeth or dancing pirouettes. And, you know, change is always happening, but the experience of change certainly changes as we think about the spectrum on which change is experienced, where you feel like you are like it's painful, you know, and sometimes change is not even noticed. And so I remember when I was in my like hardcore personal development stage and was reading so many books and taking courses, you know, and they were talking about different types of change and how there was instant change, there was cumulative change, and then there was retroactive change. And the way that they described it was just that, you know, instant change was you felt it immediately, you saw the ripple immediately. Cumulative change, it took a little bit of time before you saw the change. And retroactive change was change you didn't even notice, and then you would have a moment, it would hit you and be like, oh fuck, I haven't done X, Y, and Z, or I have done X, Y, and Z more of, and I didn't even notice when I started picking up or dropping that habit. And so the retroactive change was just change you didn't even notice happened. And I liked that, those concepts, because it was like it forced me to look at change differently, and it forced me to see that there wasn't one type of change. And I loved that, you know, because it also opened up so many more possibilities, because the answer I had before was there's one type of change and there's one way to get there, you know. And now it was like, oh, change. It's like I don't even know you.
It's like all those types of changes are happening at once too. Like I
Right.
like the way that you express with like the immediate change, the progressive change, the retroactive change, because it's like, yeah, the over time changes create the progressive change leads to what's feels like an immediate change, but you only see it when you're looking back on it. It's
Right.
like you don't really notice it in the moment. You don't notice it as it's happening, but then you know the noticing is looking back. So even when it's happening, it's like you're probably not going to be as aware, and there's not really a benefit to doing it. It's like it's going to be playing out. Like how you woke up today and how you're showing up to things is going to be different in 5 years, and it's going to be really hard to like continue to try and focus on that as if it's something that you should measure. We'll try to, we do things like measure and control, like how much we're eating in a day, how much we weigh, all these things that we try to control those changes as if we know that like that's what's best, instead of just kind of trusting that things are naturally going to play out. The less we're trying to control change, and then there are going to be points where you notice or you realize something. It's like, oh, I'm not as worried about showing up to this, because you showed up to a bunch of things maybe a little bit more nervous that you didn't even realize was playing into the eventual shift.
Yeah. I like how you said that they're all happening at the same time. And the example that came to mind was you talking about like food and diets, and how, the immediate change is like you immediately start that diet today. And so you see the immediate change in the diet choices that day. And that's also leading to the cumulative change where you're trying to put on weight and you're eating extra calories. And so, in 6 months, you see that you've gained, I don't know, 10 pounds of muscle, maybe 5 pounds of muscle. I don't know. And then eventually you see the retroactive change in a year where you don't even notice that you've been adding more weight, more calories. It's just, it almost became second nature. So it's like, at first you had to think really hard to put it, eat the extra calories. And then eventually you just naturally, it just became a part of your habit, and you got to see all those changes in one example. But it's just that we think that all change has to be immediate. And I think that's where a lot of our conflict comes from, is that we don't want it to be cumulative, and we don't want it to be retroactive. We want to notice it. We want it to be immediate, and we want it to be huge, like flipping a magical switch. And it's like, I'm a new person who's living an amazing life. And that is just so, it's an impossible thing. And we still act like we could do it, not realizing that you appreciate the cumulative and the retroactive change, because that's usually a change of a mindset, a change of priority for yourself. And then that led to a different life quality. And in that, you weren't someone that was so focused on eating a diet. You just were someone that was creating an environment that had a diet that met your needs without having it to be stressful.
Yeah, I think part of it, and I like these different types of change because they challenge the common perception of change. Right? Like people are often like things are changing. Like, no, things are change. Everything is change. And what I liked about retroactive change especially is that if you follow that, you start to recognize that there are infinite things that you're not seeing in terms of change that's already happening.
Yes.
We fall under this impression that change doesn't happen unless we see it.
It's in the future only.
It's not happening unless I see that shit happening. This is why I love the expression "a watched pot never boils," because it fucks with that exact mentality. It's like, it's not gonna start while you're watching it. It's not. And you're just like, yes, it will, and it just fucks with you. But change is. That's what life is. Life is change. And we don't see so much of it. And then we get caught off guard. Yeah. We're just like, oh my God, there's a wildfire. It's like, yeah, because things are drying out for like a long time. Like there's a bunch of shit happening like all the time. But that requires us to live in this state of flux that frankly makes us uncomfortable. It really does. The recognition that things are constantly changing and changing in a way that we can't know, that we cannot know, terrifies us. And yet it's so laughably obvious when you look at something like meteorology. Meteorology is logically looking at past behaviors, taking all the information that we have, and then saying, this is what's going to happen next based on our logic. And every time it's like, oh, but we missed this. You know, oh yeah, there was some up currents
There's
that
a
we didn't
running joke in
expect.
society. The weatherman's always wrong.
You know what I mean? No? But but we
We
look
like
at
how
that,
close
and meteorology is a perfect example of how we try to understand everything. We look at past patterns, we use deductive reasoning, and then we go, it's going to be this next. And while that happens and works in a very small, controlled environment, anything more complex, like life, it falls the fuck apart because there's always more information. There's too many considerations to rely on the if then logic strategy. We'll say strategy, right? Because that's what we try to do. That's why we're always caught off guard by the weather, right? It's like, whoa, yeah, but it's like, and now they're like, it's global warming because of this. It's like, hold up. Just because you've noticed things are changing doesn't mean you know why.
Yeah.
Right. And there's a lot to that argument. I know immediately people are going to go, well, humans are making an impact on the environment. Okay, yeah, obviously, true. But what creates more heat for the world? Our carbon emissions or the fucking pavement that absorbs and radiates the heat each and every sunny day, right? There's a question. Here's another one. Methane, for example, is like 100 times or more worse than carbon dioxide in terms of being a greenhouse gas. Methane emissions have been rising dramatically for like the last 30 years as more and more volcanoes spew it out into the atmosphere, as well as the melting permafrost in the Arctic Circle, releasing methane that's thousands of years old from the ground. So you could say, well, humans caused that. I don't know, because then you have solar activity. Solar activity in itself is up and way more active in the last 50 years because we don't have really any information past that, right? Like we have vague documents of like the sun emitting a massive blast from like 2,000 years ago, written by some dude on a scroll. Gives us no quantifiable data whatsoever. Like there's so much that we don't know, and yet we all want to go to bed at night thinking to ourselves, no, we absolutely do. Yeah, we absolutely know, because then if I know, I can devise a solution. Right. And just as our vegan commenter was going on the other day, that solution almost is always divisive because it's controlling. It defines you as someone who knows the problem, but it also defines everybody else as schmucks.
Oh, big time. And that sense of like, well, knowing, but also knowing like what's going on right now and then how it's going to change, and making like as quick as you make an assumption about the immediacy of a situation and that feels similar to a previous situation, it's almost like there can be this desire to respond in the same way, but like you're never looking at the same situation. It's never exactly the same as it was, because like from a logical looking at things, like if you're thinking about your experience, your environment, your response, like things can feel very, very similar. Like we've sat here a number of times right here like this, that I could almost like, I can get so close to saying it's exactly the same. And yet nothing about the conversation, nothing about what's going through my head right now are exactly the same.
Or any of the cells in any of our bodies.
Right.
Like it's not even close to the same thing, but like we'll almost try to project the same experience over again. Yeah. If we have a
similar,
desire,
therefore the same.
And therefore I act this way in this spot, in this situation, because I always have.
And it kept me safe.
And I'm still alive.
Yay for the human brain.
Oh my gosh, it's a motherfucker.
But it's keeping you alive when you're not being aware. Or at least it's trying to.
Yeah.
Like it has a mechanism. Yeah. It has a mechanism.
Yeah. Find the path of least resistance and stick to it.
Yeah.
Copy and paste.
Copy, paste. Because if it's unknown, then it can't feel like it. No, and it's just unknown. The next thing's unknown. Question mark.
That's growth. This is the awareness that we were talking about the other day, that as we grow, our awareness grows. right? And that's the whole reason. Because in nature, if your awareness doesn't grow, you don't last very long.
Right.
We're born with a very basic set of tools: danger, jump. You know,
Yeah.
really, that's why we had the fight or flight or fawn or any of those things. That's why we have these instinctual mechanisms, right? Our body is like, right,
Mhm.
you're probably not going to take the driver's seat for a bit. You know, so we've got a set of tools from your grandpappy and beyond, and it's going to keep you going, right? And that's the biological evolution. And we forget that it's not just you are born, you go into school, and now you become intelligent because you've memorized things. Your entire body, from the moment it's conceived and starts to grow into a human being, is an example of intelligence that has taken billions of years to learn how to do what it's doing right there. Like the fact that your fingernails know where to grow, they don't come out of your nostril. You know, the fact that like your hair knows when to start coming in. They, you know, like all of these things, like all of these things that we're like, oh, that's just, you know, that's genes. Oh, that's just genes. Like, is that all it is? Like just genes? Like, what was it? There's like a, I don't know, a 1,000 or 10,000 gigabytes of information in a single gram of DNA.
Mhm.
Jesus Christ.
Right? Like, because we are quite literally packed with intelligence, packed with past habits and tools, things that have worked, things that have continued on with us. And now we're building upon that. The entire human race is standing on the shoulders of everything else that has ever come before and lived simultaneously.
Life has given you a baton and you can run with it as far as possible. And then you give that, it almost feels like you just give that information, not just with procreation, but like every person that you talk to, you're sharing information with them that is being stored to some degree. And so if they have kids, you know, you helped contribute and share that information with them. And so you don't have to go make a clan of 12 children, you know, so in order to like keep life learning and keep it. No, you're sharing information in every single moment, in every conversation, and without even words. You know, they were saying that, you know, like 60 to 70% of our communication with each other is nonverbal. So you're communicating information without words. And so words and concepts, although a tool, are not always necessary and often aren't used. So, you know, you think about that and how information is constantly being shared and how cool that is that you get to contribute to that, whether you think you are or not. And so it almost feels like, you know, there is no such thing as non-participation in this experience of life, because the person who is sitting at the dinner table and says nothing contributes just as much as the person who doesn't give another attendee for that dinner a word, a moment to speak. You know, they're both contributing just as much. And so that's why it's important to remember that, you know, this doesn't have to be taken too seriously, but you're always engaged, you're always here. And so you're never dropping the ball, because you're always the experience of life. It's just that we get so convinced of the stories, and we treat them like irrefutable facts, but answers are just our best guesses, and our stories are just another tool of the experience. And you can use both, but you don't always have to zoom in on them so much.
Absolutely. And that sense of like, you can get really caught up, I think, in that sense of should or shouldn't, and how they're like, it can become such a self-fulfilling prophecy, like assumptions about actions, about how you should act or shouldn't act in certain situations. Like, you know, for example, right now, while one of us is talking, the others don't as much.
I can if I want to.
And you absolutely can if you want to. And it's all on the table, but it isn't like one or the other. It doesn't mean something if you're doing it. Like, I cannot tell you with that sense of like, you know, being quiet or not talking, like how much that's a shouldn't in my head,
Right.
You know, but it's like, it's appropriate in all different sorts of situations. But if you think it's a shouldn't, then you're absolutely fucked.
Yeah.
Like, you're fucked in the
It doesn't
sense,
appear to be doing anything.
and it doesn't.
It
See,
makes it
that's
harder
it.
to use words.
Well, when you're silent, you don't feel like you're doing anything.
Yeah.
Right. So you feel like, oh, I should be contributing to the conversation. I should be saying something, and it's all just, you know, remnant of this idea that there's a certain person you need to be, because otherwise the people around you aren't going to accept you. You're going to be alone and rejected and sad. It just keeps getting worse when you really explore that shit, right? Like that's really what it is. And yet there's quite literally this huge movement in the world that's like meditation. Meditation's super important. Find time to meditate. You know when the best time to meditate is? When you're sitting at a table with a bunch of people and you don't have anything to say and nobody's really talking to you, and you just spend that time admiring how a carrot is formed on your plate, or you just take the time to look up at the lighting and enjoy that, or you listen to the meals of the people around you, or you feel the chair that you're sitting in, you take in the details without any opinion about it, you just take them in. That is a moment of meditation that changes everything else afterward. It changes how you feel when you do talk. It changes how you feel when someone talks to you. But it's a moment of meditation, otherwise known as attention. And that's it. Yeah. You don't need to be setting aside a half hour in the lotus position with your eyes closed and nice pleasant music in the background. You really don't. You can just stop trying to prove yourself. And when there's a moment where talking isn't necessary, take it. It's yours. It's really what it is. And what you find is you have so much more time. You have so much more time because you're actually paying attention to it instead of running to the next thing that validates you.
Mm-hmm. And oh my gosh, taking that time, like life fills in so much more. Days feel longer, things feel fuller, colors feel brighter. You know, and that sense of like meditating and using that almost is like, I really like that feel of like, or suggestion, whatever, when you're listening, like you just using that as meditation time. Or, you know, when you for a second are like, oh shit, what, I had a thought, something else. It's like that can be a meditation time instead of the panic. Like the alternative to panic can be meditation in like a useful way, because it is just attention. There's more relaxation there. It's not so much, oh, I should be doing something differently. Like it kind of, it can settle you in a big way. So like every time there's a panic, feels longer term or shorter term, just being like, you know, this is an opportunity for meditation, whatever that means. It doesn't have to be separating yourself at all. It can actually be absolutely involved in day-to-day experiences, in moment-to-moment experiences, in conversations, in, you know, as soon as you start jumping to assumptions or conclusions, like I can, instead of this, I can, you know, meditate.
Which is simple, and I'll do one with everyone right now. Keep your eyes open. I want you to just close your mouth, inhale very slowly through your nose, and really feel the air filling your nose, pouring down into your lungs. Just feel the air. Now open your mouth and exhale very slowly. That was it. You just meditated or paid attention. See, it was that simple. And if you make it complicated, no, I really gotta center on my heart chakra, and I need to, and it's true. Like all of a sudden you start defeating the purpose, because it can't just be that simple. That doesn't mean anything about me. That doesn't mean anything about the journey that I'm on, the shit that I'm letting go of. It's like, yeah, exactly. Which means it's less shit to let go of later. Mm-hmm. And this is something that Krishnamurti was really talking about in terms of ceremony. Ceremony ultimately just replaces intelligence after a while. We start doing a thing because it meant something at some point, and then we're just doing it because it meant something without knowing what it meant. We're just like, it seemed important. Quick, get the incense and the ropes. And there's no actual meaning or purpose or anything behind it, because it meant something to the person who did it for themselves, who did it first. And then it meant less and less and less to every person who copied it. And the same is true with how you live your life.
Mm-hmm.
it's not fresh, it's not new, it's not alive. Like I've heard him talk about, it's alive, life is alive, it's not dead. And the traditions, the rigidity, the structures, they're all dead. Like the only thing that's alive is what's happening right now. What's going on right now. Like this is a lot, and like everything that's alive is happening right now. I used to think of like the thought kind of crossed my mind. I remember it was like 7 or 8 years ago. I think that like everything in the universe is happening right now. And it hit me in a way that like it was just something I thought about for a little bit. And that was a while ago. That was like, before I thought about anything having to do with, meditation or getting into spirituality and all that shit. But like that everything's happening right now. And it's not something you have to think about because it's like it's a stark sort of, and not even a line. It's just realizing, oh, that doesn't have to be something to think about. Like your mind can be something that's separate from the thoughts about the fact that everything's happening right now, but it
like change
in to the experience that you're having. Like this is it right here. And everything that you could possibly fathom happening is happening right now, but you can't think about it because you couldn't possibly know it. What you know is happening is the environment that you're in. And it's not like, what is happening, but you're at least aware, attentive, there for it, seeing it, involved in it, and it's alive. It's not, but trying to repeat things, like trying to take someone else's words, something someone expresses, and then even resharing it or reposting it, like throughout social media, a lot of people are sharing kind of knowledge. It's you learn something that's dead, but it's learned, and then you share it and it's dead still. It's not fresh, it's because that can all, but that's unknown. That's a big question mark. The things that are alive, and like regardless of, even with the structures and the repetition of being, sort of quote unquote dead, it's still like different every single time. But it's how much is it coming from you? Like how much is it authentically coming from you right now, as opposed to, looking around to try to guarantee something that's next by just looking back to something that's been, or a way that's been, a way that someone expressed something, a way that someone lived, and repeating their way. And it's like, that's not your way. No one's way is going to be your way. Your way is yours. Your way is unique. Your way is the, narrow path. That's it. That's what's yours. And you couldn't possibly live like anyone else, because even if you try,
Buddha nature.
that's it. Yeah,
that's what he was talking about.
Yeah.
Your nature, yours, not the nature that is Buddha, because Buddha was just whatever Buddha was. That was the point. He wasn't the Buddha at all.
It's like, yeah, you're Ray nature, you're Amanda nature, you're my Andrew nature. Because there can be a side of this where it's like you almost want to get rid of your own nature. You think, oh, there's something wrong with your nature or your story or the things you've been through. Like,
welcome to Christianity.
Oh my gosh. Like there can be almost like a discounting of your entire life. Like all the experiences that you've been through aren't even available in your mind because you discount them, because you think there's been something wrong with things that you've did, instead of like not having an opinion of it, not assuming it's been right, not assuming it's been wrong, because you can feel really good about it being right too. Like, I have lived life the right way, and now I just look back at it and feel really good about it and feel good about myself. Or you can assume you've done everything wrong and look back and like think you got to do something to change, but it's still looking back, at what you've been, instead of being able to use all of that functionally for new things, and almost put it through this, I don't know, process of turning what's been into what could be, but not discounting everything you've ever been through. It informs you.
Yeah. I like the the process of learning, and just how it was going through a bunch of very vague principles or a vague frame, and then being instructed to funnel that through my very specific filter. And basically what I was told in school was just, when you're reading about a topic and you're reading dead information, filter it through your words, filter it through your perspective, because that's going to be the best way for you to learn these very general principles, because you're at least from my experience, you're encouraged to give it a whirl. And so I love the scientific method, and having like a hypothesis, and then having the experiment to test that, and then seeing the results, and then seeing how far off or how close the hypothesis was to your assumptions, and then testing it out, and then repeating that, and then not really being stuck or attached to the information, or not being stuck to the hypothesis. And that was my relationship to that method, right? And it was just because, the answers aren't set in stone. And that's the impression I got, was that everything's negotiable to some degree. Everything is, it's not so static. It's moving. And because you're always collecting information, you're always changing your hypothesis. You're always doing new experiments. You're always seeing different results. You're always going, that is the hypothesis seems to have worked out, but I have no way to confirm why those results happened the way that they did. And a principle of science that I hold dear to my heart is correlation does not imply causation. So just because two things happen near each other doesn't mean that they cause each other. It doesn't mean that they didn't. But it's just that you're not supposed to settle so hard on an answer, or on a hypothesis, or on a learning perspective, or on a process or a method, because you don't have all the information. But as you collect information, you change your process, and you, as the scientific explorer or as the perspective, evolve. And then you just keep going through that process, and learning feels like this dance that keeps adding choreography instead of a required march to some very set in stone destination. And so learning was fluid. And so the experience of life also felt fluid. But for a lot of people, it's very much one answer, one method, there's only one way. And that's, why I often heard that, people don't like the process of learning. They don't like the process of change, because it means one thing that feels terrible.
Well, that's just it, and I like the way that you put that. It's not just about the information, but it's about how you take it in, how you interpret it, how you test it, how you use it and inform yourself by it within the context of your own existence, within the context of your own life. And so that's where we get different perspectives. That's where we see advancement in so many things. But I want to bring this back to the big question, or rather, the big problem in terms of consciousness. This is where science ultimately fails. What is the role of consciousness? What is the role of the observer? What is our role as awareness itself in terms of the universe and existence and our subjective experience? What are dreams? What's really happening with imagination? Like, these are all things that we kind of discount in terms of, well, what's behaviorally a challenge for the system, right? Rather than, what the fuck's happening there when a kid's daydreaming? Like, what is the value there when a kid gets so lost in a perception that they're jumping away from cracks so they don't break their mother's back, right? Like, there's so much in terms of our role here, and we're never going to challenge. We're never going to look at that. We're never going to explore that realm until people take it upon themselves to get real creative in terms of their subjective reality, to actually have the courage to question everything, come back to what they know, reestablish it for themselves, and explore that. This is ultimately everything that I've been doing for the last half of my life consciously, in terms of, I don't really know. I really don't know. Like, give you a perfect example. The Secret, which came out, I think 2005, 2006, just somewhere in there. It was this big law of attraction manifestation thing, and man, people just grabbed onto that with both fucking hands. Like, and they still do. I looked at that and went, that's interesting. I wonder if there's anything there. Like, I wonder if that was ever founded on someone noticing something and then just running with it because it gave them a sense of security and control? Was there an ounce of truth behind it? And so I took that information in. I didn't go, yes, finally the answer to all my problems, because I know that never works, right? And I looked at the idea that perhaps our conscious state has an impact over our reality, because that's really what the law of attraction was trying to put. There's some kind of a connection there, right? But then we oversimplify it to get a sense of control, to get a sense of identity, to get a sense of purpose, a sense of where we're going, a sense of what the best way to live is, and all of that. And so I took that in, and I would looked at it over time, and what I've started to realize is that there is some degree of truth there, but not in the controlling sense, in the sense that, once again, the audience that you're experiencing around you is very much reflective of the shit that you're still holding on to. And that's really interesting. That's not a sense of control. There's no sense of you're going to get more. There's a sense that you don't really need to. And there's an ease that goes with that, that does, in fact, have an impact on everything around you, on every single conversation and every single choice you make, on how you need to perceive your day or not when you wake up. It changes everything.
Oh, yeah. It shifts things in the sense like almost video game-esque, but with not like if it was a video game in which it was all just exploration, like an explorative video game, there's not necessarily levels, but there are changes that happen, but they don't, it's just the whole time it doesn't mean something about you, but your environment in the video game will be reflective of priorities, of focuses. So if you do start playing the game that's all like going Grand Theft Auto, just being like a fucking maniac doing things for yourself, focused on yourself, trying to control the whole thing, like the video game's gonna suck ass. But like, and there's not a sense of feeling good about yourself because it's just the game. The environment just gets worse and worse and worse. And so when you start to see it where it's like, yeah, video game ass, don't get too focused on that, but also because it is very much real. Like, it's not VR, it's real, but there's the responsibility comes in that you are the environment. Like, you're the whole game, you're the characters, in the sense of like where your priority is reflects your experience and like the reality of your experience, not the way you think about your experience. Because if you think about yourself really highly and you're super afraid of doing anything new, trying anything new, getting outside your comfort zone, like the reality of your experience is tense as fuck. Like, and you think about yourself in a positive way in order to just feel better about yourself, to just get you through, to just get you to a point that like you got to sit there and think to do it. But like, if hypothetically there wasn't a video game where you couldn't feel how thoughts made you feel, there wouldn't be an incentive to acting in that way, because you don't get that hit of like doing something well, being in control so much. Like, I think understanding that your environment's going to be reflective of the state of mind that you're in, like, you do have influence on your experience based on, where your focus is, and making it about you creates a shitty experience here, like not necessarily in your head, and not making it about you. It's like trying to measure that in your head doesn't make as much sense, but you can start to see, the opportunities in everything, like the opportunity in walking down the street and like seeing someone you've never met and just giving them a big hi, howdy, like there's opportunity in everything, more so, as opposed to fear. And it's not to say the fear is not going to come up, but it's still like stepping into fear is stepping into an unknown. And like, the more you're involved in it, the less you're making it about you, the less you're trying to control it, like the more you'll actually be involved, the more you can appreciate, being in that experience.
It's there's definitely I like the analogy of the video game, and how there wouldn't necessarily be levels, but there would be layers of depth. And so in our experience, it's sometimes things feel so superficial. Like, what's the point? You know, you don't see any meaning. And sometimes things feel so serendipitous and so synchronous that you're like, how could I have not seen that everything is connected? And I appreciate both of those perspectives and the varying depths in between them, because they all add to each other. You know, if there was no despair and pain, then there wouldn't really be much pleasure to the joy. There really wouldn't be that much lightness to it without that comparison of the weight of the darkness. And so I do appreciate being able to bounce between those layers, and because you couldn't do that necessarily in a video game, where it's like it's very chronological, you know, or very linear, and so one level leads to the next. But with layers and depth, you can very much feel like your things are lighter and deeper within the same day, within the same moment. And it's and that's that instant change, where sometimes it feels like your whole life is totally different, and really nothing is that different. It's the perspective that has ultimately done a 360, and all of a sudden life feels totally different, but a lot of the considerations and factors are exactly the same as they were just a second ago. And yet it's that unlocked level, or that different layer that you're experiencing, and how you can bounce back between them. But sometimes we do copy and paste, or we maintain a perspective for so long that it doesn't feel like there could be another layer, or it doesn't feel like there could be a change in the depth. But it's I guess the way that I used to say it to myself when I was a lot younger was that life is an all or nothing deal, and that I wouldn't want to get rid of the days where I feel like a bag of shit, because they add so much to the days where I feel like I am walking on sunshine.
Yeah, it's interesting because like changes happen momentarily, but we almost fight them because of what we find familiar. And what I mean is that I asked my daughter once, do you remember when you didn't know how to write? Do you remember before you knew how to speak? And of course not, right? But things that she does now are built on things that she learned in that period that she can no longer remember, because the depth of her experience has grown to such a point that that simplistic view no longer makes sense. It's so far outside of the considerations that she now deals with day to day that she can't possibly remember that time period. And if she does, it feels like another lifetime. It feels like another person entirely. And it's so important that we recognize that is the threshold. That shit happens all the time if you're not holding on to the familiar. But that's very much the case. And this is something that really dawned on me as I was going through a lot of, let's say, catharsis. Like, I was facing a lot of the fact that, you know, my insecurities existed, that my needs existed, that all of this existed. And then I started getting into trying to address them and come to terms with them and eradicate them and all of that stuff. And eventually I'm just like, right, you know, it's not about doing any of that. It really is just about accepting them. And by accepting them, I don't mean being good with them. I mean not needing to think about them. And this goes back to something that we talked about early on in the podcast too. We worry about our insecurities, or more importantly, we worry. And that's very much the same word that's used when a dog is gnawing a bone. We're worrying that bone. You know, we are worrying ourselves. We're dragging ourselves down. And we can stop. We can stop doing that. We can stop going through all these things and going, I got to address that. I got to address that. I got to address that because that's haunting me. Well, yeah. And that's why you want to address it. It's because it's haunting you. But if you don't, if you look at it, you accept it, you learn from it. And that doesn't mean going, yes, and now I need to act this way. It really doesn't. Change happens moment to moment. It's not a noticeable thing that somebody's going to come and give you a ribbon for. It really does happen in those moments where the slightest shade of gray shifts, where all of a sudden you have a fear about what somebody thinks about you. And rather than changing what you do to compensate for that fear, you actively go, nope, just going to roll the dice. That isn't going to make that fear go away. but it has changed the spectrum. It has changed where you sit in the spectrum of how much faith you have in yourself versus how much investment you have in that fear. And your life, moment by moment, changes constantly. But it's the littlest things, it's the littlest decisions, whether to scratch that itch, that need, or to continue on without some sense of certainty or some sense that you will be right or more. That's what changes your life. And it doesn't seem like it does, especially if you're looking for the change, because even looking for the change comes from that lack of faith. Even looking for the change is scratching that itch. But if you can just move forward, what you will find in, I'm not even going to say how long, because there's no limitation. Life is a matter of time and attention. How much attention you put into each moment changes how much time change takes, or how much time it takes for you to participate as change.
Well said. And I think sometimes that sense of change can be something we want to control. And I think even when you are doing that, like the example that was coming to mind was when I was in New York this spring, and kind of like they're admittedly being fully aware that it was going to a familiar environment, because not for any like great reason besides it's familiar. Like it's not where, based on more sensitivity, like, you know, possibly moving here earlier would have been something, or trying a different city, you know, like to expand and be that question mark. Like within that, there was almost senses of like trying to control change, like, no, change is this or that. And so like there was a night I went to a day I went to a comedy club, like an open mic sort of thing. And there was a side that was like, you know, trying to think, oh, this is my issue right now, and I have to do this thing in order to overcome it, blah, 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 as opposed to just like, you know, based on my current situation, what I'm doing in my life, like seeing that there's opportunities within certain realms to change. But at the same time, like, even if I was trying to come up with something, that was still a change in me. And sometimes like being in this where you're feeling like overarching resistance, like there's other things that you do that are smaller changes within that. And it's kind of like when you're procrastinating doing something that you assume you're doing something wrong, but then you start doing something else that you deem to be procrastination, but then you learn from that thing and you do that thing. And it's like, yeah, maybe you had this idea that you were procrastinating doing this other thing, but it's still in perfect timing. It's still playing out. And I think throughout your life, you can, the less you're thinking about how things should change, you know, the more opportunity you see as, you know, acting differently. Like you can go into the same exact situation and be willing to admit that it's going to be totally different than any other situation you've ever been in. And there's no way for it to possibly be the same. And it can be more exciting because you're not trying to. And even if similar feelings or ideas come up, like it still doesn't guarantee that, or you don't have to try and curate it into the same sort of thing or assume that it's going to be the same, even if you feel similar in a similar situation. Like the more willing you are day to day, even at a job, you know, 9-to-5 job where things seem very, very similar day to day, like it's still a question mark. You going into work tomorrow is still a question mark about how that day is going to go, like the things that you learn, the people that you interact with, which is amazing. Like just the question mark of life is absolutely magical when you see how much potential is in that. But trying to make the same thing happen, it's like there's still potential in that, but it's not quite the same. Just not quite the same.
It's blind.
Yeah.
I very much every moment feels like a blank canvas, and you know, although we seem to paint very similar pictures, they're never identical. I mean, you think about if you were to paint 100 trees on canvases, no two trees are going to be the same. And it's because every single time you're putting paint onto the canvas, it's a brand new experience. Even if you use the same brush, the same color, the same direction that you're starting in, it is always different, and you don't know how it's going to turn out, and that is both exciting and it can feel very overwhelming. And it's because in that predictability, we predictability has made the claim that it offers guarantees, that because I think I can predict a situation, that means I know exactly how it's going to go, and that's not the case. But what's wonderful about all of our previous experiences is that the most relevant ones always come up to the surface. And it's great when you see that happening, and that summer job that you thought was a waste of your time somehow becomes entirely relevant to the new opportunity that you're in the middle of. And something that you disregarded as useless is now very useful. And so you don't know which experience is going to be relevant. But the great thing about the brain is that it's always bringing up something similar. It's always bringing up something that could be relevant. And just like with learning, you take a general or a similar principle and you filter it through the specific conditions of the moment that you're in. And now everything is adding to that cumulative change. Instead of it needing to be guaranteed change, it's unfolding, and it's unfolding in ways that make sense with information that is most relevant. And you don't actually have to work hard to do that. That's always happening.
And that's the beauty of doing new things and trying new things and expanding outside of your comfort zone, is like you're going to have a fuckload more experiences to pull from. When you're in future experiences, like how many new things you try and how little you're trying to curate the same sort of thing over and over and over, like that expands everything. That expands your life. That's the most exciting thing you could possibly do, is new things, but it forces you to push past, push past that line, push past that point where you feel good, you feel comfortable, like for that to eventually be something that you step into that feels, quote unquote good. It's like, it's not going to feel great at first. Mm-hmm. And that can become, your North Star in a sense, is just expansion, uncertain expansion. Like Levi used this example in one of our mental stretching episodes, I think, or as a Levi with Levi episode, where it's like a video game, like the one we were playing, StarCraft. And it's like, it's a big map and there's a light, and you explore some of the darkness, it expands. You explore some of the darkness, it expands. And that becomes your world. And that is your world, like your experiences. And it's like, what better thing, what more important thing could you prioritize than your experience? Not what it means about you, but just like how much is there. Because there's a lot for everyone in potential, but it's like you're the one who has to take that step and be willing to take that step past, just a little bit past, what you're so comfortable with feeling.
And you're doing it right now. That's the best part about it. Until you reach for a thought, you're already being changed. Just relax into it. That said, we are at the end of this episode of Dualistic Unity Raw. We are going to take a 15-minute break and then continue on with our Tier 1 Patreon group today. Tier 1, by the way, is only $5 a month. If you happen to want to support us on Patreon, we would love to see you there. You can join us twice a week on Tier 1 for a group. I think it's 4 days a week for Tier 2. Possibly no, it's 5 days a week for Tier 2, and then 5 days a week for Tier 3. But Tier 3 gets an exclusive group on Sunday that is extremely private, let's just say, where most of our group discussions on Patreon are recorded and then posted after the fact. Seriously, we have over 1,000 hours of group discussions since we started Dualistic Unity on our Patreon. The Tier 3 groups are never recorded, and they are often a smaller group. So if you're looking for something a little bit more private, if you want to talk to us in a group setting that isn't recorded, won't be there for somebody to look at later on, then by all means, join us on a Tier 3. And otherwise, and also as a Tier 3, you also get sick discounts on our retreats and our merch and a bunch of stuff. So that said, we're going to end this here. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody, and we will see you soon. Patreon, by the way, is patreon.com/dualistic unity. And I know Andrew has been trying to get it to show up, and there it is, and then it disappeared because, you know, things are a little slow sometimes. But it's been fun, everyone. We'll see you next time or in 15 minutes.